Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in today. We have an all-new story to share with you, so let's dive right in. My name is Jack, and for 12 years, I lived a life I thought was flawless. I had a wife, Emily, who I believed loved me, two amazing kids who made every challenge worthwhile, and a home filled with joy and warmth. If you had asked me back then, I would have said that I was one of the lucky ones, that I had built something real and unbreakable. But life has a way of showing you that things are never as perfect as they seem. You see, betrayal isn't always about cheating. Sometimes it's about living a lie without even knowing it. It's about waking up one day and realizing that the life you spent over a decade building wasn't truly yours to begin with. I know many of you watching have been in relationships. Some of you are married, some have kids, and maybe you think you know your partner inside and out. I used to think the same, but after what happened to me, I realized that trust isn't just about love, it's about evidence. Because no matter how much you love someone, if they're hiding something from you, then you're living in an illusion. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I walked away from the life I thought I wanted. You might begin to question things you never thought to question before, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see the dangers of trusting blindly, the way I once did. Let's get started. Emily and I met in college. We were both young, ambitious, and full of big dreams. We connected almost instantly, and by the time we graduated, I was certain she was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. We got married a year after graduation. Together, we built a life from the ground up, starting as broke college graduates to eventually becoming homeowners with a family. Like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but I never once doubted our foundation. I never suspected a thing. If someone had told me back then that my entire life was built on a lie, I would have laughed at them. But here's the thing about the truth. It doesn't care how perfect your life looks. It doesn't care about your happiness. It just waits, quiet, patient, inevitable, until the moment everything comes crashing down. One morning, I woke up with no reason to believe anything was wrong. I had the day off work, and since the kids were on a break from school, I thought it would be a perfect time for a relaxing day at home. Emily had to work, so it was just me, Lucas, and Lily in the house. I made breakfast for the kids, and we spent the morning watching cartoons, laughing at the funny moments, and simply enjoying each other's company. Then, around noon, it happened. 1 minute, Lucas was sitting on the couch playing with his toy car, and the next, he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. At first, I thought he might have tripped or was joking around, but then I saw how his body was tensing up. His breaths were quick and shallow. Panic hit me like a wave. I had never seen him like this before. My hands shook as I rushed over to him, calling his name, praying he would respond, but he couldn't. I don't even remember how I managed to get my shoes on or grab my keys. Everything became a blur. I scooped Lucas up into my arms, barely feeling his weight. Lily, who had been watching in horror, started crying uncontrollably. She begged me not to leave her alone. I couldn't, not after what she had just witnessed. So I took them both. I held Lily's hand with one arm and carried Lucas with the other. I rushed to the car and drove like I'd never driven before, keeping a constant eye on Lucas in the rearview mirror, praying that he wouldn't stop breathing before we made it to the hospital. When we finally arrived, I screamed for help. Nurses rushed over, and in seconds, they had Lucas on a stretcher, whisking him away while firing questions at me. What happened? How long had he been like this? Does he have any medical conditions? I tried to answer, but honestly, my brain was barely processing anything. I paced the hallway, clutching my phone, torn between whether or not I should call Emily at work. I didn't want to panic her until I knew exactly what was going on. After what seemed like forever, a doctor finally came out and told me that they had stabilized him. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But before I could fully process the relief, the doctor said something that made my stomach drop. We need to know his genotype. I was confused. His genotype? I didn't even know what that meant. But I knew that Emily and I both had an AA blood type, which meant our kids should have the same. Simple genetics. Still, something about the way the doctor asked the question made me uneasy. It wasn't a casual query. There was a weight to it. AA, I said, though I felt a strange sense of doubt in my chest as I said it. The doctor's gaze narrowed slightly, as if sensing my hesitation. Are you sure? He asked. The way he asked made my chest tighten. I had never actually double-checked. I'd simply assumed. I opened my mouth to confirm again, but the words felt strange, as if I were no longer sure. The doctor sighed, his expression unreadable. Just to be sure, we're going to run a genotype test, he said. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. I can still remember remember sitting in that sterile hospital chair, waiting for the doctor to return with the results. When he finally came in, holding a clipboard with Daniel's test results, I wasn't nervous. Why would I be? This was routine, a precaution. But then, when he looked up at me, something in his eyes made my stomach tighten. "Your son's genotype is," he said, his voice calm and professional. I blinked. The words didn't immediately make sense. "That can't be right," I said, shaking my head. "I'm AA, my wife is AA. That means our kids must be A too." The doctor glanced at me, then at Daniel, who was lying on the bed, looking worn but stable. "We ran the test twice," he said. "The result is the same." For a moment, I couldn't grasp what he was saying. I wasn't a doctor, but I knew basic biology. 2A parents cannot have an as child. It didn't make sense. "Can you check again?" I found myself asking, my voice unsteady. The doctor sighed, nodding. "We can run another test, but I assure you this result is accurate." So they did. Another vial of blood, another hour of waiting, and then came more time spent trying to convince myself that this was just a mistake, maybe a mix-up or faulty equipment. But when the results came back, they were exactly the same. Daniel was as. I stared at my son, his small fingers gripping the edge of the hospital blanket, completely unaware of the storm raging inside me. The doctor must have seen the look on my face, because he spoke again, his tone careful. "Would you like us to test your daughter as well?" I nodded, barely able to speak. If this was some kind of mistake, testing Ella would surely clear it up. Another test, another round of waiting. My mind was racing with every possible explanation, trying to find something that made sense. The result? Ella was A. I should have felt relieved, but instead, a heavy unease settled over me. Why was Daniel different? I tried to come up with logical explanations, but no matter how hard I tried, one thought kept repeating itself in my mind, like a whisper I couldn't silence. Check everything. As I sat in the hospital waiting room, the minutes dragged by like hours. My hands were clammy, gripping my knees as I tried to steady my breath. I had already asked the doctor to proceed with a DNA test, but now that I was waiting for the results, I wasn't sure if I was prepared for them. A small part of me still hoped this was all some huge misunderstanding, that there would be an explanation that made it all right. I didn't tell Jane what I was doing. She was still at work. When the nurse finally appeared, holding a sealed envelope, she handed it to me with a neutral expression, unaware of the storm it carried with it. "Here are the results, sir." I took the envelope, tearing it open, unfolding the paper inside, and then everything stopped. 0% paternity match. I blinked, my vision blurring. I read it again, thinking maybe I had misread something, but no, there it was, clear as day. Neither Daniel nor Ella were mine. I was heartbroken. I took a deep breath before dialing Jane's number. The phone barely rang twice before she picked up. "Hey babe," she said, her voice bright but distracted, probably still at her desk. I kept my voice steady, as controlled as I could manage. "There's been a medical emergency. I'm at the hospital with the kids." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "What happened? Is it Daniel? What's wrong?" Her words tumbled out, panic already seeping into her voice. "He collapsed. They're running tests, but he's stable now. I'm leaving work right now," she said without hesitation. "I'll be there as soon as I can." And that was it. I hung up before I could say anything more, because if I stayed on the line even for a second longer, I was sure my voice would crack. I couldn't let her hear the devastation in me. I couldn't let her know that the man who was supposed to be her husband wasn't the same man anymore. I sat in the hospital waiting room, staring at the black screen of my phone. All I felt was numbness. She arrived in just under 40 minutes, rushing into the waiting room as if she had run the entire way. Her eyes immediately found me, and when she saw Daniel responding to treatment, relief washed over her face. "What happened? How is he doing?" she asked. "The doctor just released him," I said, my voice detached. "He's stable now. He's fine." Jane's shoulders sagged in relief. She covered her face with her hands for a moment before looking back at me. "God, I was so scared," she whispered. "Let's take him home." I nodded, feeling nothing. There was no reaction in me. She had no idea that the man sitting next to her wasn't the same one who had kissed her goodbye that morning. By the time we got home, Daniel had fallen asleep in the back seat, his head resting against Ella's shoulder. Jane was still whispering prayers under her breath, thanking God that Daniel was okay. I pulled into the driveway and shifted the car into park, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Jane unbuckled her seat belt and glanced at me. "Are you coming in?" I shook my head. "I just need a minute." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, but she didn't press. Yes. She opened her door, carefully pulling Daniel into her arms while Ella trailed beside her. I watched them disappear into the house, the front door clicking shut behind them, and then the floodgates opened. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my chest tightened, and before I could stop myself, the first sob tore through me, then another and another. I cried like someone who had just lost everything, because in that moment, I had. Years of lies came crashing down. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, maybe hours, but when I finally managed to compose myself, I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and stepped out of the car. It was time to face Jane. When I walked into the house, the kids were already asleep. Jane was in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she rinsed a plate under the sink. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I placed the envelope on the dining table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. She turned, wiping her hands on a towel, her eyebrows knitting together in mild concern. "What is it?" she asked. I swallowed hard, staring at her. "I had the kids tested at the hospital," I said, "for their genotype." Her expression remained unchanged. "Okay," she replied lightly, but I noticed her posture shift, her shoulders tightening as if bracing herself. I took a breath, then dropped the bomb. "Daniel is as." She blinked. "What?" "He's as Jane." My voice was steady, but I could feel the strain behind it. "That's impossible, right? Since we're both AA." She looked away briefly. "That doesn't make sense. Maybe there was a mistake." I let out a bitter laugh. "That's what I thought too. So I had them run the test again. Same result." She frowned. "I don't understand, Thomas. What are you trying to say?" I could feel my pulse quickening. "I did a DNA test," I said, voice tight, "for both of them." The room fell deathly silent. She just stood there, frozen, her face blank. I reached for the envelope, pulled out the papers, and slammed them on the table. The sound made her jump. Her hands trembled as she picked up the documents. I watched as her eyes scanned the words, her mouth parting in a silent gasp. And then she broke. A choked sob escaped her lips. "Thomas, please," she whispered, barely above a whisper. I said nothing. I just stared at her, my chest heavy with disbelief. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for me, but I stepped back, out of her reach. "I'm sorry," she murmured, shaking her head rapidly. "I swear, I am sore," she sobbed harder, covering her mouth as though it would stop the sound from escaping. "I love you, Thomas. I swear I love you. You don't lie to people you love," I said. "You don't let them live a lie while you carry the truth." She kept crying, kept pleading, but there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked past her, heading toward the guest room. This house no longer felt like home. The next few days were pure torment. Jane moved cautiously around me, her voice soft, her steps tentative. She tried to act as though nothing had changed, but nothing she did could undo the damage. She cooked my favorite meals, jollof rice with perfectly fried plantains, spicy goat stew, grilled fish seasoned just right. The house smelled of comfort, of love, but it made me nauseous. How do you eat when your stomach is full of betrayal? At night, she would knock on the guest room door. "Thomas," she'd whisper, "please talk to me." But I never answered. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she had watched me love those kids, knowing they weren't mine. And then there was the worst part, Daniel and Ella. I still tucked them in at night, still listened to their stories, still kissed their foreheads. They were innocent. They didn't deserve this. But every time I looked at them, my heart shattered all over again. A week passed, a week of forced silence, fake smiles, and strained small talk for the kids. A week of Jane hoping, praying that I would come around. I couldn't. One evening, I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at my suitcase. I wasn't angry anymore. I stood, grabbed my suitcase, and packed quickly. A couple shirts, a few pairs of jeans, my laptop, just the essentials. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Before I left, I grabbed a sheet of paper, wrote the only thing I could manage. I can't do this. I love the kids, but our entire life was built on a lie. I need to go. I left a note where she would see it, took one last look around the house, turned off my phone, grabbed my keys, and walked out. I didn't look back. The next morning, I was at work, trying to keep my head down and focus. Then, just before lunch, Jane showed up. I stood up just as she rushed toward me, her face streaked with tears, as if she hadn't even had time to prepare. People were starting to stare, but she didn't care. "Please, Thomas," she choked out. "Come home. We can fix this. We have to fix this." "Jane, there's nothing to fix." My voice came out steady, but inside, I was falling apart. "What am I supposed to tell the kids?" she begged, her voice cracking. "They're asking for you. They don't understand why you're not home." I exhaled sharply. "That's your problem, problem now," I replied, my tone cold, distant. "You should have thought about that before you lied to me for 12 years. She shook her head vigorously, taking a step closer, her hands reaching for mine, but I pulled away. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed, her voice laced with regret. "I'm sorry. Things will never be the same," I said firmly. "I can't trust you again." Her face fell, her breath catching as though I had slapped her. More tears spilled from her eyes, but they didn't affect me. I had spent the past week drowning in pain, while she had spent the last 12 years keeping secrets from me. I stepped back, the space between us growing. "Goodbye, Jane." I turned around and walked away. A few days later, the divorce papers were delivered to her, and just like that, the life I thought I had was over. So, what did I learn? First, trust, but verify. We like to believe that love means never questioning those closest to us, but that's not true. If you love someone, you should trust them, yes, but that trust needs to be earned and maintained. I never questioned my wife, never once thought to check the truth for myself. I assumed the kids were mine because they called me dad, but I was wrong, and that assumption cost me 12 years of my life. Never assume. Ask. Check. Second, love is not enough. We're told that love can conquer anything, that as long as two people love each other, they can work through anything. That's a lie. Love without honesty is an illusion. It's like building a house on sand. It might stand for a while, but eventually it'll crumble. I loved Jane. I loved our family. But love couldn't fix what she did. Love couldn't erase the fact that she'd looked me in the eye for over a decade and never told me the truth. If love is real, it comes with honesty, respect, and trust. Without those things, love means nothing. Lastly, healing takes time. I won't lie to you and say I'm completely over it. I still think about the kids. I still wonder if I made the right decision. I still wake up some nights feeling like I'm stuck in a nightmare. But I know now that some wounds are too deep to just patch up and move on. Some things can't be fixed, and that's okay. Some betrayals are too large to forgive. Some people don't deserve a second chance. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to truly heal. So now, I'll ask you, what would you have done in my position? If you were me, if you found out the life you built was based on a lie, would you have stayed? Would you have forgiven her? Would you have tried to fix things for the sake of the kids? Or would you have walked away like I did? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story made you think, if it made you feel something, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking real-life stories like this. See you in the next one.